and it is the nation's birthday. This, of course, will have a great shelf life because we're going to do something special today. We're going to walk through the beginning of it all, from the Mayflower pub, the birth of capitalism over ale and a large set of mammalian glands slapped down with a mole with hair on it. Yeah, it was a beautiful scene in London. And they decided time to leave and where it all went. So I'm going to do a kind of a long history. This is in my new book, which I'm working on right now. And you can learn more at caryharrison.com. But I just want to walk you through it because it's such a treat for me to do this stuff. And, my family were there. We came over on the Mayflower. My ancestors wrote the Declaration of Independence. My ancestors wrote the Constitution. Imperfectly, I will point out. We were naughty bastards too. Naughty, but made amends finally by becoming Quakers. Quakers, peaceniks. Let's recycle. Let's shake hands. Let's be polite to each other. All of that, but it took a little time. So we're just going to jump into it, shall we? We're also live streaming right now on Substack and YouTube. You can simply Google Cary Harrison Substack. Cary spelled like Cary Grant, Cary. Cary Harrison Substack or Cary Harrison YouTube, and that way we can stay connected. When you arrive at your destination, you can also easily find the live streaming video at kpfk.net. Just go to kpfk.net. kpfk.net. Also, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at caryharrison.com. There you're going to get a full transcript of this entire show, plus access to clips and stuff that we simply cannot do on the radio. That is our newsletter at caryharrison.com. So, happy birthday, America. Today is the anniversary of the revolution. It's a special show because I'm going to walk you through the first moments, the birth of capitalism in a London saloon, the Mayflower pub, all the way to the glorious AI staring at us in glorious Orwell and perpetuity. So strap on your seatbelts and join me for this exciting one-time adventure. And later, we're going to probably open up the phones for a few of your choice comments just to end the show. But let's be clear. This was not a revolution. It was a temper tantrum with bayonets. King George III, raised the price of tea, and suddenly Boston thought itself Athens. No taxation without representation, they cried, while keeping representation chained up in the back garden. King George, now there's a man who thought real estate was forever. He paid for the colonies, fair and square, with good old-fashioned European conquest. His Majesty considered America part of the family, albeit the loud, ungrateful cousin with delusions of grandeur. So imagine his surprise when that cousin burned the family portraits, pawned the silverware, and took up with a French aristocrat named Lafayette. And today, right here, right now, I am coming to you live from the French Riviera. The city of Nice, many of you have been there. For those in Hollywood that go to film festivals, you certainly go to Cannes. I'm right next door here on the French Riviera. I wanted to do this show, especially today, from the home of Lafayette, without whom, without the French, without King Louis XVI, it never would have happened. And of course, we're not taught this in school, are we? We have a handful of myths. George Washington rowing across the Potomac. That's all you need to know. I have family diaries of George Washington coming through the family farm and eating dinner and taking out some of his teeth and saying colorful things and talking about Martha in a way that Martha would not have enjoyed. Maybe I'll share that with you. It's certainly going to be in the book. But for right now, let's just do the headlines as I slurp my instant coffee, French instant coffee, which is about as good as Folgers, to be honest. So let's talk about France. We just couldn't help ourselves. England was bleeding. We caught the scent like a Versailles lapdog with a taste for British ankles. We sent ships gold, a teenage marquis with a sword longer than his resume, all in the name of liberty. by which we meant sticking it to the English, regardless the cost. Now, let's remember, too, that you and I, let's say you're a WASP like me, you came from England once upon a time, you were property of the crown. You were not a person, you were not a citizen, you had no rights. No rights. Let me say that again and underscore it. No rights. None. Zero. Property of the king. He declared war. You went. He says, stand on your head. Went. He said, empty your pockets. You said, yes, sir. Or your head fell off and rolled down the closest alley. So, property of the king. No rights. Nothing. Zero. So, in order to pull off this revolution, we had to find someone else who didn't like the king as much as we did. The French. And what a cost it was. You see, we bankrolled the American Rebellion. Well, double meaning, right? Revolution so thoroughly that we forgot to feed our own people. The royal court was awash in powdered wigs and unpaid invoices. And while America celebrated its freedom, France stood there, pockets empty, whispering, Mon Dieu, what have we done? Well, let's enter the French Revolution, shall we? Because if there's one thing the poor can't stand, it's watching someone else get a revolution before they do. So we lit the match under our own monarchy, not a symbolic match, an actual guillotine. Louis XVI, our benevolent donor to American independence, couldn't even flee in a straight line. They caught him dressed like a footman. Robespierre rose up, shrieked out about virtue, and began slicing through nobility like a baker through stale baguettes. And that's how France got liberty, not from pamphlets or powdered debates, but from rains of heads and the efficient graze of falling steel. Whoosh! Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Americans, we were writing a constitution. Grand stuff, unless you weren't white or male or land rich. We'd built a government of the people, by the people, for the people, as long as the people looked like Jefferson and owned something taxable. King George in England, he lost his colonies and eventually his marbles. He spoke to trees. He appointed them to office, which in hindsight might have been a step up. Had he done that earlier, might have been easy. We might still be English. And France, well, from them we got liberté, égalité, and 40 years of blood-splattered chaos, all thanks to helping a fledgling republic that thought freedom meant free shipping. So when you celebrate the spirit of 76, do raise a glass to the kings bankrupted, the peasants beheaded, and the nations that mistook someone else's revolution for their own moral redemption. Liberty is lovely, yes, but someone else always pays the tab. And in this case, France paid the tab with interest. Vive la révolution, mes amis. But next time, send cash up front, they say. So let's jump into the history of the United States and understand that some of us listening right now will have families, ancestors that came over on the Mayflower. Many of the rest of us arrived when we were arrived, but we all do share the myth of the Mayflower. We all do share the origin of this country. So I'm going to start from the very beginning and take you through how it all happened, all the way through World War II, all the way through to AI today. So it's going to be a story time. And I don't do this often. I always do monologues at the middle of at the beginning of the show. But this one is special because it is the birthday of our country, and you have a right to know sort of how you got here. And if you got here early, if you got here late, you still got here. And what is this thing that we do that you, if you got here later, you had to absorb? French instant coffee. Wow. It's something else. So let's start with the Pilgrims, those paragons of piety, those stalwarts of sobriety, or so the history books would have you believe. The truth is, those guys were a bunch of slobbering, stumbling, drunken louts. These were my ancestors on my mother's side of the family. And how did our grand American adventure begin? Well, it was an allergy to the king, and it was a given. And anything you could say or did say against him could cause your head to suddenly go rolling, separated from your shoulders, very much like the French guillotine, down a random alley, by the way, never to be found again. There was no real privacy. There was no real safe space at the time. People were subjects of the king. In other words, complete property of the crown. And you had no citizenship, no agency. You could simply be scooped up for having the wrong shaped pimple and shoved into a gibbet on the local pier for birds to pick at you through the open metal bars. If you don't know what a gibbet is, it's a relic of humanity's more theatrical approach to punishment. It was an iron cage or frame designed to hold the body, soon to be a corpse, hold that body upright, letting it rot in public view. And you might see one of these on a hilltop or at a crossroads or near the harbor, anywhere it could remind you that crime doesn't pay, but it sure does decay. So, it being England, it was a dark and stormy night. And of course, it was what's a good tale without a little melodrama? A dark and stormy night when the Pilgrims careened into the Mayflower pub in Rotherhithe, a venerable den of iniquity. The air was thick with stench of stale beer, of vomit, and the faint scent of desperation. The Mayflower pub in Rotherhithe was a temple of damp despair, a place where the floor stuck to your boots, and so did the conversation. It smelled of pipe smoke, of boiled cabbage, and failed maritime ambitions. Not exactly the kind of joint where one expects the birth of a nation. But then empires have been built on worse foundations. Look at Venice or Facebook. At a battered table in the back, illuminated by a sputtering candle and the vague hope of divine intervention, sat a collection of disillusioned Puritans. William Bradford, looking like a man who'd lost an argument with God and who was determined to win the rematch. He gripped his mug with the same fervor he once reserved for Leviticus. Beside him, William Brewster, half priest and half pub bore, puffed on a pipe and frowned as though constipated with holy purpose. "I'm done with this wretched island," Bradford growled, slamming his mug on the table. "England is a cesspit of idolatry, greed, and damp socks. Every morning it's taxes, and every night it's bishops and pompous, perfumed popinjays." We do love a triple alliteration. "Waddling about in silk robes like they're auditioning for some liturgical burlesque." Brewster leaned in, solemn, like a funeral. "It's true. The Archbishop's hat alone is a moral offense. I've seen smaller boats, and the incense, my God, it's like trying to bray in a brothel. Of course, the Mayflower pub was a brothel. Meanwhile, one of the ladies of the pub leaned over to the table, revealing two large mammalian jugs, one of which was crowned by a hairy mole. Edward Winslow, too young to be cynical but old enough to fake it, piped up, "Aye. And now the king taxes our windows. Windows, lads! What's next? A levy on farts? A toll for blinking?" The table erupted in the kind of grim laughter usually reserved for executions. The Mayflower pub, you see, specialized in this brand of communal despair, where half the men believed in divine providence and the other half believed they were the punchline. Now, enter Miles Standish, another famous name, a professional soldier and a recreational buzzkill. He'd only joined the meeting because someone said there'd be ale, and he stuck around because someone else mentioned the possibility of violence. "You're all mad," he said, arms folded like a man who'd been disappointed by better revolutions. "You think there's freedom across the Atlantic? There's frostbite, there's starvation, there's tribes who won't be impressed by all your Latin. And worst of all, no pubs." Bradford stared him down. "We'll bring our own." "Brilliant," Standish scoffed. "Bring your own death, too. Ships cost money, and I haven't seen a single one of you squeeze a shilling since Cromwell was in diapers." Brewster, who'd never let a practical concern get in the way of a harebrained scheme, produced a rumpled scroll. "We'll trick the merchants, tell them we're starting a colony. Tobacco, furs, riches beyond measure. These were things the king was already exporting from that area. Standish raised an eyebrow, and when they find out you founded a soggy theocracy in the middle of nowhere, we'll already be too dead to care, Brewster replied, with the serene confidence of a man who's never met a bear. And just like that, capitalism was born. Poof! Somewhere between a lie, a ledger, and an unlicensed pint of ale. It didn't walk in with fanfare. It slithered in under the table and helped itself to the tip jar. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of the bartender aggressively failing to clean anything. Eventually, Winslow spoke again in his soft voice. Imagine it, a new land, no bishops, no kings, no window tax, just fresh air, honest work, and the occasional heretic burning. Bradford nodded as if all goes to hell, at least we'll freeze to death with the glow of burning. They all laughed cheerfully. It got loud, bitter, and edged with just enough lunacy to pass for optimism. Even Standish cracked a grin, though he muttered something about dysentery and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. When the barkeep called for last orders, the decision had been made. They would leave England from the Mayflower pub, not because they loved liberty, but because they'd run out of things to complain about locally. The new world offered a fresh canvas for disappointment. New bishops, new taxes, new tyrants to loathe. It was hope disguised as exile. As they staggered into the London fog, Bradford looked back at the pub, that hallowed womb of their delusion. One day, he muttered, this place will be famous. And with that, the proto-pilgrims shuffled off into the mist, drunk on cheap ale and worse ideas. Behind them, the Mayflower pub resumed its true purpose, serving alcohol to the spiritually unwell and quietly facilitating the next great catastrophe. Let's now enter the voyage of the self-righteous sardines. History calls it the Mayflower Voyage, but let's be clear. It was a 66-day floating disaster. Imagine stuffing 100 religious malcontents into a leaking wine barrel, giving them a compass and a Bible, and whispering good luck. Then imagine the barrel smells like wet sheep. Welcome aboard the Mayflower. The ship itself was built for hauling barrels, not Bibles. It had no plumbing, little ventilation, and all the charm of a medieval oubliette. Within hours of departure, it became apparent that divine inspiration did not include basic nautical engineering. William Bradford, the default diarist, became no one else. He became actually the default diarist because no one else could spell. And he tried to keep morale afloat. He wrote pious entries about faith and fortitude and God's mysterious plan, though he failed to mention the rats or the smell, both of which were omnipresent and growing bolder by the hour. Meanwhile, Brewster turned every bowel movement into a sermon. Let this constipation be a lesson from the Lord, he declared, while others prayed for either a miracle or a shipwreck. We have to remember the father of Protestantism also wrote endlessly about his constipation. So let's just say, unlike the Catholic religion, the Protestant one is filled with constipation. Just look up, well, that's a sidetrack. Maybe I really can't read it. It's just so vile. But Martin Luther's endless passages on his constipation, it's just beautiful. And these, of course, are our religious heroes from the beginning. Anyway, back to the Mayflower, back to the fun. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, live streaming right now on YouTube. Simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube or go to Substack and get our free newsletter, and you're going to get a transcript of this entire thing. These are excerpts out of my new book, which is basically a MAGA history of the United States, because I want them to be able to get it too, but it has to be a little fun. So here we are on the Mayflower. It's week 2. Half the passengers are seasick. The other half are thinking fondly of the Church of England. Edward Winslow kept a brave face, though he confessed to missing windows, even the taxed ones. Miles Standish, somehow not yet mutinous, spent most of the voyage sharpening knives and muttering to himself in Latin. He claimed it was prayer. Others suspected he was rehearsing. The food ran out, you see, almost immediately, which was impressive considering it had already gone bad before they left port. Meals consisted of moldy hardtack, suspicious pickled things, and the occasional dried fish that looked and tasted like it had already dried twice. And there was, of course, a storm, because, of course, there was. The kind that tears sails, that breaks masts, and inspires panic psalms shouted into the sky. Brewster saw it as a divine test. Standish saw it as Tuesday. During one particularly violent gale, a main beam cracked. It looked like the voyage would end not in glory, but in a soggy group baptism. Badford Never, the optimist, recorded that God provided the means for all our salvation. What he meant was that someone popped up the beam with a great iron screw, which was likely stolen from the cargo. Thus, the foundation of American resilience, theft, and makeshift carpentry. Miraculously, no one died on the way, though a few passengers seemed to be negotiating with God for the privilege. One sailor who mocked the psalm-singing pukes was struck down with disease shortly after, interpreted as divine justice by everyone except his widow, of course. Finally, land appeared. The sight of the new world filled them with awe, dread, and an overwhelming desire to never see another salted herring again. They dropped anchor at Cape Cod, a spot they had absolutely not intended to reach. But as history has taught us, if you plant a flag and write about it convincingly enough, no one will notice you got completely lost. Before setting a foot ashore, they drafted the Mayflower Compact, a document that began as a covenant with God and ended as a passive-aggressive HOA agreement. It was signed by 41 men, several of whom were already fantasizing about mutiny and indoor plumbing. And the Mayflower Compact, by the way, was based on the fact that the Mayflower had been grabbed by pirates along the way, and the pirates had had a very interesting kind of democracy on board. It was sort of a democracy. It was pure egalitarianism. So whenever they got the treasure, it was split 100% even Steven throughout the entire crew. That meant the captain got exactly as much gold as the cook, as the deck swabber. Now, why would that be? Simple. You're on a pirate ship. If the cook gets jealous and is making your food, maybe there's something in your food and you just expire. And now the next guy takes over and it goes on forever and you have complete unrest and chaos. So they came up with a system where everyone was completely protected. The captain's only great, I guess, latitude, you might say, would be in navigation, bigger cabin, all the rest of it. Same food, same bounty, same plunder. The Mayflower was attacked and learned from the pirates that if they hadn't decided one man, one vote, that's the Mayflower Compact, isn't it? One man, one vote, the seat of American democracy, they would have been toast too. So that's where it came about. We can thank the pirates for that. So after months of vomiting and preaching and involuntary celibacy, the Puritans arrived, not in triumph, but in a state of collective indigestion. They had reached the promised land, cold, confused, and wildly underdressed. Let's jump into the first winter of incompetence and scurvy. For the righteous shall inherit the earth, assuming they don't starve first. When the Pilgrims finally dragged their half-frozen feet onto the shores of the New World, they looked around the windswept landscape, the leafless trees, the hostile weather, and declared with an absolute straight face, "This is the promised land." Clearly, they had never been promised much. They landed in November, which any farmer, any fisherman, any person who's ever seen a calendar could tell you is not the optimal season for founding a civilization. But you see, these were not practical men. These were people who believed they were divinely chosen, despite being unable to choose an appropriate month to arrive. The ground was frozen, the trees were bare, the local wildlife had gone into hiding, and yet there they were with no shelter, no food supply, and no plan beyond pray harder. The first order of business was to build homes. So naturally, they lived on the ship for 2 more months while arguing about how many cubits wide a goodly and godly cottage should be. Meanwhile, scurvy swept through the ranks like divine retribution with bad breath. Their diet consisted mostly of salted despair with a side of regret. William Bradford, now reluctantly in charge, kept writing in his journal about providence and purpose, while casually glossing over the fact that half the colony was either dead or hallucinating. Quote, "It pleased God to visit us with great sickness," he wrote, which is Puritan for "we have completely cocked this up, but let's blame heaven." Brewster, the sermon factory, tried to comfort the dying by quoting scripture while breathing directly in their faces. Many took that as a final insult. By January, the Pilgrims had constructed a mighty 3 buildings, 2 of which collapsed in the wind. The third promptly caught fire because someone thought candles and hay made excellent roommates. Miles Standish, meanwhile, spent the winter patrolling the perimeter, looking for anything to stab, beasts, heretics, time. He was a man out of place, more comfortable with a sword than a shovel, and thoroughly dismayed to discover you can't threaten scurvy into submission. And then came the burials, quiet, hasty affairs conducted at night so that the local tribes wouldn't notice the body count. They buried them in mass graves and planted corn on top, not out of disrespect, but in a grim attempt at deception. Nothing to see here, just good Christian agriculture. Now, by March, spring is on the way. Only 47 of the original 102 Mayflower passengers remained alive. Most were too weak to stand, let alone start a country. Winslow, whose optimism had somehow survived the voyage, now resembled a haunted choir boy with rickets. Yet he still insisted, "We are building a godly society." From the outside, it looked more like a failed group project supervised by a wrathful sky wizard. But then, salvation. Salvation. A native man named Samoset walked into their ragged camp one day, and to their complete shock, greeted them in English. Imagine the scene. Half-starved colonists, dressed in flea-ridden burlap, blinking in disbelief at a man who not only spoke their language, but didn't immediately murder them. Samoset introduced them to Squanto, a man who had survived enslavement, transatlantic travel, and the full spectrum of European nonsense, and still agreed to help these walking disasters grow food, to help them find water, to help them survive nature without accidentally setting themselves on fire. So it's hard to overstate this. Without Squanto, they would have been historical footnotes. End of story. Never were here. We're still in England. It's a cautionary tale, though, because it's a punchline without a setup. And so by spring, the survivors emerged from their wooden hovels, blinking like mole rats in the sun, praising God for their endurance, while quietly ignoring that most of it was due to the basic human decency of people they would later displace. Or if you like the word murder, you could use that. And thus ended the first winter, less a triumph of faith, more a testament to sheer dumb survival. They came seeking religious freedom and found frostbite, malnutrition, and the unbearable realization that Providence doesn't stack firewood. But they endured, not because they were strong, not because they were smart, but because history has a sense of humor, and this was only the opening act. So then there's the first Thanksgiving, a meal, a myth, really a marketing campaign. How to rebrand colonial hunger as holiday cheer. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. We are looking back at the beginning of this country, how it all started. Here we have the Great Revolution, our birthday, who are we, where we came from, and how it all came to be. Something most of us are not taught in school, as we're taught a handful of myths. So I'm just walking you through the joys of who we are and why we are, and especially why we are where we are today, so you can read between the lines. You can also see us live streaming at caryharrison.com or on Google, on YouTube at Cary Harrison GooTube. Yes, go to Cary Harrison YouTube or Cary Harrison Substack and make sure you join that and our newsletter. So, after barely surviving the winter of frostbite and theological bickering, the Pilgrims stumbled into spring like hungover badgers emerging from a sermon. They'd buried half the colony, eaten most of the rest, and owed their lives almost entirely to the indigenous people they would later describe as savages. But never mind all of that. By autumn, they'd managed through a mix of Squanto's agricultural wisdom, through dumb luck, through divine outsourcing, to produce a modest harvest. And so they did. What any guilt-ridden colonial outfit would do. They threw a feast to celebrate not dying. This wasn't the postcard Thanksgiving of your elementary school reenactments, where shiny buckled hats and smiling cornucopias dance in harmony. This was a 3-day truce meal thrown by a desperate theocracy and attended by a suspicious but patient native tribe that probably thought, if we feed them, maybe they'll stop accidentally setting things on fire. Bradford called it a harvest celebration, though it bore a striking resemblance to a victory lap for surviving on their own incompetence. The Wampanoag, led by, let's keep out all the complicated names, shall we? Because it's radio and we can't read. Let's just say the Indians, and we'll call them that because that's what they were called at the time. Well, let's call them Native Americans. Why not? Much easier, much broader. The Native Americans arrived with around 90 men, bringing most of the actual food, including venison, shellfish, and something resembling practical competence. The Pilgrims brought boiled pumpkin, stale corn mush, and the unwavering belief that they had invented civilization. There was no cranberry sauce, there was no pie, no mashed potatoes, just a lot of chewing and a general sense of confusion. Brewster opened the meal with a prayer so long it may have counted as the fourth day of the event. Standish polished his musket throughout, just in case someone tried to introduce dancing. Remember, Puritans. Meanwhile, Edward Winslow, ever the bright-eyed PR man of the colony, wrote a cheerful letter describing the event in terms so vague it could have been a medieval dinner or a livestock auction. He framed it as divine reward, glossing over the fact that the Native Americans were doing most of the heavy lifting and none of the sermonizing. And yet, that thin sliver of a letter written to reassure. Everyone wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? Well, you can call low-cost airlines because they specialize in cheap flights, in discount hotel rooms, in cheap car rentals, and with the best price guarantee, often at 75% off. That's right, cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, and cheap car rentals, often at 75% off. I want you to call 901-235-1795, 901-235-1795, 901-235-1795. Call now, 901-235-1795.
Can your IRA stand up to the next financial crisis that our top economists are saying is at our doorsteps? By allocating a percentage of your IRA into physical gold and silver with a tax-free rollover, you can diversify and safeguard your holdings from turbulent markets and economic downturns by putting your IRA back on the gold standard. Find out how to safeguard your assets with a tax-free rollover with a Genesis Gold IRA, the only IRA that can hold physical precious metals. Call now for your free gold and silver report. Protect your IRA today. Don't let your retirement accounts get caught off guard by trade and tariff wars. Learn why a Genesis Gold IRA is the #1 choice for thousands of Americans across the nation. 800-590-6470. 800-590-6470. 800-590-6470. That's 800-590-6470.
It is the Cary Harrison Files, live on the nation's birthday, taking a peek at how we actually came to be. It had nothing to do with what you thought. 99% of us didn't even know there was a Mayflower pub in London, had no idea, did not know who the players were, the deals that they cut, and how this thing started. Then, of course, later, after the king had built the 13 colonies, my ancestors, maybe yours too, turned around and said, we're keeping it, go away. Thank you for paying for it. Thank you for funding it. This was the kind of early capitalism we started. And here we are today now in the harshest grips. As I open up the phone lines at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735 to get your thoughts on this 4th of July. How should it be celebrated? Can it be celebrated still? Is it something entirely different? Let's take a peek at AI in these modern times. It began as a gleam in sci-fi nerds' eyes, didn't it? A future of helpful robots, self-driving cars, algorithms smart enough to sort out world peace, or at least your Netflix queue. And you fast forward to today, and AI is mostly a collection of glorified spam filters. It's deep fake factories. It's chatbots that couldn't pass the Turing test if their life depended on it. But they'll try to upsell you a subscription anyway. The dream was automation freeing us from soul-crushing drudgery. The reality, AI is the intern who never sleeps, but also never actually does what you want. Instead, it's busy replacing jobs, inventing new ways to screw up hiring processes with built-in bias, and occasionally launching PR disasters starring racist chatbots that sound like they've binge-watched one too many conspiracy videos. Your friendly neighborhood cashier? Kiss that goodbye. Your taxi driver? See ya. Sorry, your rideshare overlord is a cold, emotionless algorithm that'll reroute you through 5 other passengers before dumping you in the wrong neighborhood. AI doesn't get tired, it doesn't unionize, and it doesn't need dental insurance. It makes it the ultimate mercenary employee. And after the big, beautiful bill has passed, this is the legal future you and I will now face. Let's go to Rebecca in Los Angeles. You're on the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome.
Hi, Cary. I just wanted to thank you for this revelation about the Pilgrims, of which I never knew. And these people clinging to their ancestry, coming over on the Mayflower. And now we know it was just a ship full of bugs. It's just such a revelation for me, and I'm so glad to hear it. I mean, look at the history books that we were raised in going to school. It's all a bunch of baloney. That's what it is. It's baloney. But now I know the truth, and I'm going to spread it.
Well, and Rebecca, you probably remember one of the few things you could ever say about George Washington was that he rode the Potomac standing up and didn't fall down. And there it is. And like, what more do you need to know? A guy went across a river standing in a boat and didn't fall down. And he was a great guy, period. His wooden teeth, you know, the myth of his wooden teeth? Yeah, you do.
That's what they used back in the day, wooden teeth.
Except that they weren't wooden. So here's what they were. He took teeth out of slaves that were the correct teeth for his sized mouth and had them implanted.
Oh,
So
goodness.
the
I didn't
myth
know
is
that
wooden
either.
teeth. So there's like so much more mystery history, which is what I love. I could care less about Napoleon in 1843. So what? Why? Why?
Yeah,
And what was this? Who
right.
paid for it? What did they get out of it? So there's like so much more to learn. But here in
They need
this,
to burn the history books and rewrite everything. That's what they need to do. They need to rewrite history truthfully.
they are doing that. Unfortunately, they are not the people you want doing that.
Yeah, that sounds right. But
Yeah.
anyway, thank you again, and I'm going to just dwell on this right now because it's such an awakening. So
Okay.
thank you, Cary, and continue.
Excellent. Be like Madge. Just soak in it. Thank you so much for your call, Rebecca. That opens up a line at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Let's go to Harold in Santa Barbara. You're on the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the welcome up. Man, you have excellent timing. Today, another failed attempt upon my martyrism. And in my hometown, my uncle helped make this town what it is. And in fact, the major employer, ESRI, he made, and I inherited from him. But just like the Pilgrims, it's not mine, even though it's written. I inherited over $80 million, and it's written. I inherited another $4 million, and it's written. But what would they rather do? They'd rather burn me at the stake as a heretic. Sorry. Thank you for listening.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome to give some of that to the station. I think the station probably is feeling a little hungry these days. As you know, we are listed in Project 2025 by call letters. So who's to say how long any of us gets to talk this openly with each other? It's really quite extraordinary times. That opens up a line at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Those are your Harrison hotlines. Let's take a peek at the founding fathers, shall we? Obviously, for me, they are my ancestors as well, having started in the Mayflower. It makes sense naturally that they are connected, and they may be yours too. I don't have the unfortunate bounty fortunate bounty that Harold does, 80 million plus another 2 or 3 or 4, being burned as a heretic. Yeah, you should take some of that and hire bodyguards or a bunch of fire extinguishers. That's just my thought on that. Let's take a peek at, being burned as heretics. So that's good. That's like witch burning, isn't it? And witch burning is all part of our history in this country. And we do it today, don't we? We burn witches. It just looks different. By the late 1600s, the original Pilgrim spirit, equal parts self-righteousness and gastrointestinal distress and an overwhelming fear of dancing, it had metastasized into full-blown Puritan paranoia. They had survived the New World. They had domesticated the turkey. They had built churches stern enough to make stone weep. But with nothing left to starve or colonize, their attention turned inward, like a python chewing its own tail, preferably for moral reasons. Welcome to Salem, Massachusetts, a town where the crops were rotting, the winters were long, everyone was up in each other's business like God's own neighborhood watch, and all they needed was a spark. What they got was 2 bored girls and a Caribbean servant who understood drama. When Betty Paris and Abigail Williams started twitching, they started shrieking and claiming invisible torment. The good people of Salem didn't ask, are these children unwell? No, they leapt straight to, they are possessed by witches, and we should definitely hang someone about it. You see, science was not invited to the party here. Within weeks, accusations flew like arrows at a Puritan picnic. You could be denounced for sneezing during prayer. You could be denounced for owning a cat with an attitude or having breasts larger than average. Entire families were dismantled by something as flimsy as a bad dream or a neighbor's grudge. And if you were a woman over 40 with land and no husband, well, then, congratulations. You were practically a broomstick away from public strangling. The judicial process was, in a word, innovative. Just like today, special evidence that is testimony about things that allegedly happened in dreams or visions was not only admissible, it was encouraged. You can see this is all a big metaphor for right now, isn't it? Imagine being tried for murder or locked up because someone dreamt you looked guilty in a hat. This wasn't justice. This was community theater with fatal consequences. And of course, the courts were run by men who saw piety as a sport and due process as a continental indulgence. Cotton Mather, son of Increase Mather, yes, that was a real name, not a euphemism for inflation. He was among the chief theological hype men behind the trials. He was a man who could find sin in a sneeze and devilry in a daisy. But perhaps the most charming part of all of this was that confession could save you, while truth got you killed. So, admit to flying naked with Satan? Fine. You're reformed. Deny it, and you're dangling from a tree by lunch. It was less a trial, more a hostage negotiation with logic tied up in the basement. And in the end, 19 people were hanged. One man was pressed to death with stones for refusing to plead because he still had some dignity, and several others died in prison, mostly of neglect, bad ventilation, and America's founding commitment to subpar healthcare. I'm sorry about my sarcasm. I just can't help it. Eventually, the madness fizzled out, not because of reason, mind you, but because it started targeting the upper classes. Funny how these things always come to a screeching halt once the landowners get nervous. And we'll go to you, Stan, in East LA in just a second. Years later, the state apologized, sort of. Reparations were offered in the form of money, of sheep, and the vague promise that we'd never do that again, right before inventing the Red Scare, Guantanamo, Alligator Alcatraz, and Nextdoor.com. Today, Salem makes a tidy profit off its gore legacy. There's a thriving tourism industry, complete with wax museums and guided tours and novelty T-shirts that read, "I got stoned in Salem." The dead, of course, remain dignified because ghosts don't buy tickets. So let's remember the witch trials not as a stain on history, but as a feature, not a bug, a feature of society built on suspicion, on moral panic, and the deeply American instinct to blame anything but ourselves. After all, what is a witch hunt if not just Puritan karaoke, where everyone gets a turn and someone always dies at the end? Let's go to Stan from East LA. You're on the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Cary. I just have to start with what you brought up about Puritanism. It isn't what I'm going to talk about, but it's the question of why Baptists don't do sexual intercourse standing up, because people might think they're dancing.
If they're good.
Okay. All right. So here's what I'm calling about. At the end of the Star Spangled Banner, it's the land of the free and the home of the brave. And if we change that to the land of the free white male and the home of the slave, we will have the United States of America before the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So we are that, and we're back to that with Trump. And I want to tell you that there's a thing on the internet. It's PASOIR.com. I've said it before on stations. Nobody seems to go after it, but they say something that I can't let go.
it says we can legally, constitutionally rid ourselves of Trump within 6 weeks, but nobody seems to hear that or think.
Well,
I mean, I don't know if they can do it or not, but
I did
somebody
ask you, Stan,
jump
if you
in
can,
and say,
if you can find out how that's done and let us know, we could talk about it more. But I mean, I could put on a blog that I can do that too, and it's great. It looks great, but like, how exactly is that done? If you can find that out and you want to email that to me, I am happy to share it. Okay.
I will email it if I can find it out. I really, really appreciate you being there.
I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you so much for your call. And that opens up a line at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. And let's sort of end with the founding fathers. This would be the revolutionary time. They were enlightened thinkers, also with slaves and syphilis. So let's just be accurate about it. Or we hold these truths to be self-evident unless you're not a white man. The American Revolution, as we all know, didn't just create a nation. It kicked off one of history's most ambitious rebranding campaigns. Men like Jefferson and Washington and Franklin and Hamilton and Madison, names etched into currency and concrete, crafted a republic from scratch using Enlightenment ideals. French wine, and where necessary, a flexible definition of hypocrisy. They talked about liberty, of course, endlessly. Liberty was the word of the day, the week, the whole damn century. But the liberty they spoke of was a very exclusive club, strictly gentlemen only. Membership required land, whiteness, and an aversion to paying taxes unless you were the one collecting them. Feels familiar, huh? And let's begin with Thomas Jefferson, who we all love, the man who penned "All men are created equal" with one hand while cradling a whip in the other. He owned over 600 enslaved people throughout his life, including Sally Hemings, a woman he legally owned and personally impregnated several times. Enlightened? Maybe. Consensual? Absolutely not. Jefferson was also deeply conflicted about slavery, but in the same way a man is conflicted about eating meat while grilling steak. He wrote pages on the moral rot of bondage, but kept the plantation running because, well, Monticello wasn't going to weed itself. And then we have George Washington, who used to pass through my family's plantation back in the day. The general who would not be king, who had wooden teeth, which were not actually wood, but rather harvested from the teeth of enslaved people. He freed his slaves in his will after he died, a final gesture of conscience best described as too little, slightly too late. And then there's Ben Franklin, really another superhero of mine, a jolly polymath who did everything from inventing bifocals to founding libraries. Many of those libraries are banned, certainly in certain states throughout the United States now. But he allegedly contracted syphilis in every available French salon. He started out owning slaves and then had a political epiphany late in life, roughly around the time it became fashionable in Philadelphia to pretend you were an abolitionist. Alexander Hamilton, Broadway's tragic anti-hero. He did not own slaves personally, unless you count the human beings his in-laws owned, whom he occasionally rented. A technicality, perhaps, but not exactly the stuff of moral high ground. He opposed slavery, mostly, but also opposed doing anything practical about it. And finally, James Madison, the so-called father of the Constitution, was 5'4", owned over 100 slaves, and spent his life talking about the delicate balance between liberty and tyranny while sitting comfortably atop the heads of the enslaved. These men, gathered in Philadelphia, drafted documents with florid calligraphy and righteous tone, and created a government by the people, for the people, so long as the people excluded women, Black people, Native Americans, and anyone without property. They codified freedom with such straight-faced earnestness, you'd almost forget half of them died surrounded by unpaid laborers and unpaid debts. But this is sort of the history of this extraordinary place. We know how and why it's cobbled together. We know the stitching. We know what has happened recently. We also know the way through this. And not today, because we're out of time, but the next time, we're going to look into how do we fix this? Now that we know how the parts are assembled, how the thing was stitched, who the original thinkers were, we know that they didn't think about curing the impossible situation that now exists. But we know if we think like them, we can probably find a way through. So it's going to be deep thinking next time. And I want to hear that from you. And I have so enjoyed sharing this kind of cool mystery history with you. I'm working on a book, which I'll have on my website, caryharrison.com. In the next couple of weeks. It's going to have all of this stuff in here, plus Nixon, swinging Dick Nixon, everything, the whole soup, cat, and pizzas, because it's just time to get this stuff out. I appreciate you spending time with me. I appreciate the great Gary Baca at KPFK. I appreciate the Rhodes Scholar and extraordinary Renee Yawarski, upon my bended knee I remain in endless supplication. And most importantly, you who spend time with me, you the listener. We're so lucky. We really are so lucky right now to be able to do this for as long as we are allowed to. So I look forward to seeing you next time. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at caryharrison.com. And I will see you next time. You know, everyone wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? Well, you can call low-cost airlines because they specialize in cheap flights, in discount hotel rooms, in cheap car rentals, and with the best price guarantee, often at 75% off. That's right, cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, and cheap car rentals, often at 75% off. I want you to call 901-235-1795, 901-235-1795, 901-235-1795. Call now, 901-235-1795.
Can your IRA stand up to the next financial crisis that our top economists are saying is at our doorsteps? By allocating a percentage of your IRA into physical gold and silver with a tax-free rollover, you can diversify and safeguard your holdings from turbulent markets and economic downturns by putting your IRA back on the gold standard. Find out how to safeguard your assets with a tax-free rollover with a Genesis Gold IRA, the only IRA that can hold physical precious metals. Call now for your free gold and silver report. Protect your IRA today. Don't let your retirement accounts get caught off guard by trade and tariff wars. Learn why a Genesis Gold IRA is the number one choice for thousands of Americans across the nation. 800-590-6470. 800-590-6470. 800-590-6470. That's 800-590-6470.